Okay, we're live. Hello and welcome to Doubt Society podcast episode number 6, featuring none other than James Bergman. So we have a reappearance of James. He was kind enough to hop back on here. Actually, really last minute, we decided to host this
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
Just like 5 minutes ago, just said, "Hey, it's April 13th, 2022, which is the Hitch's birthday." Um, and he would have been 73 today. And we thought, well, I think we have to do a Hitch
Mm.
Equinox podcast.
Yeah, no,
Um,
we got into some atavisms of Hitch and, our some moments like when I was saying his greatest enemy was his microphone, because yeah, with Turek, like, he'd plow through Frank Turek's arguments, just rhetorically dismantle them, and then like his microphone would just like fall off. And that would be like the greatest challenge for Hitch that night. So yeah, I was actually in bed, and yeah, I was just like, me and Riley were just talking about Hitch like he was saying, and I was just like, I can't turn down this opportunity to talk about the Hitch with a fellow Hitch slapper. Yeah,
yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for coming
mm.
on, and cheers, by the way, for those
Cheers,
of
man.
those who aren't listening to or aren't watching the visual. Uh,
Yeah.
Obviously, the necessary glasses of Johnny Walker Black. Oh, and I should probably do it right. Let me reach around my mic. So as Hitch would, actually, I do believe officially 2 parts Johnny Walker, 2 parts Perrier.
Hmm.
So I will indulge on the specific cocktail and add a little Perrier to that drink there.
Got to
If I
get
don't,
more of it. Got to get it mixed
yes.
in. Yeah,
Now the quantity is larger.
yeah. Breakfast of
Um,
champions.
Except no substitutes, right?
Precisely.
Yep. Yeah, but the mic thing was true. I mean, I can't believe
Mm.
how many different videos there are of Hitch where he's just been given a sound guy that I don't know. Or maybe it's Hitch. Maybe he brings around that he carries that curse of bad audio or just unfortunate audio mechanics wherever he goes.
Yeah, I mean, religious zealots would probably say that it's God interfering and trying to, make make his blasphemy less apparent and extinguished. But I must say, for an omnipotent entity, it's quite a disappointing attempt from such a being. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, his voice was one that carried quite well. So often he would, dispose of the microphone in some way and be like, I
Mm.
don't need the fucking thing. And then he would go on just, more or less just, it wasn't even shouting. His just natural voice had such a carry to it.
Yeah, just
That it,
enough. The tone was enough to just shake the wall
yeah,
of the room. Yeah, and astonish the listeners, of course.
of
What
course.
what are your favorite moments of the Hitch? Any
Oh,
memorable points where you just love rewatching, or in his books maybe, or just what are your most memorable parts about him?
oh man, when he was on TV one time, and it was I think it was when Falwell died. Was it Falwell or was it? I think it was when Falwell died. And he said, um, if you had given the man an enema, what's left would have fit inside of a matchbox.
Wow.
And I
Okay.
think I think I about fell out of my chair the first time I heard that. I mean, just obviously inference being that he's so full of shit that if you got that out of there, all that could be left, you could. I think he said actually bury him in a matchbox, and the man had just died. I mean, the day of or the day before, and I thought, oh my goodness,
I mean, let's
he's
hope his
never.
family members weren't avidly watching.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, they were probably hopefully day of. They're not on Fox News or whatever it was.
yeah.
That was back when you could go on a opposing news network. Like you could there was actually liberals would pop on Fox, and non-liberals would show up on uh, CNN or whatnot. For those who are American listeners, obviously it's going to be different stations over across the
Yeah,
pond. Where it is what
more or
time?
less. Oh, it's well at the moment it's 11 p.m.
It's 11. Oh yeah, because I was giving you a hard time because I thought it was. It's a yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
at
is a 4 hour difference. It's a 4 hour
4
difference.
hours.
I just can't.
Okay.
I just can't add. I think. Yeah, I messaged you and I counted. And I
Hey,
skipped
look,
or I left.
I can't add either, man. Hitch said, "Give me anything to do to write about, but sports." That's the same with me, but also maths. Just don't give me any maths. I'm not there, man. I'm abysmal.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I do like sports. I do like sports as we've discussed, but I
Yeah,
cannot. I can do math, but I don't enjoy doing math. I would rather read virtually anything, like the densest philosophy you could find,
Frank Shureck's
before.
stealing from God. Oh wait, no, that would be too strenuous, I think.
Yeah, yeah, before doing any sort of math. Yeah, that's
I
not.
mean,
No, I think.
I do like some sports, but it's kind of difficult talking about sports with people because like the sort of sports that I like isn't really ordinary. Like maybe I'm just supposed to be living in the 18th century, but I love like sword fighting, fencing, that sort of thing. I just think
Yeah,
that's really cool. I love role playing as like a pirate or something. I don't know. There's just something really cool about like swords and like slashing. I don't know. Call me Jack the Ripper if you want. Okay, just I'm going there. But and there's also free running and parkour that I used to do quite a bit for a few years, and yeah, I mean, I guess I do like sports, but only when it's in context to my niche interests.
sure. Yeah, yeah. I was watching some fencing not too long ago on when the Olympics were going on,
Uh-huh.
and it was, oh man, it's wild. I can't imagine having lived in what would have been the 16th century, right? I think when you would be carrying around a rapier at your side, right, and
Yeah.
somebody says the word the wrong way, and you're now brought to a duel, and it's with those little tiny. Oh no, it's very. You get a lot of that from like the if you read Shakespeare. I think.
You probably have better chances from a Russian duel, like illustrated in Dostoevsky's novels like Demons and The Idiot, because it's with pistols anyway with the Dostoevsky example, but because it's kind of luck of the draw really. Although you do feel like you're Clint Eastwood, so I never let that pass. I quite like westerns as well. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I'd be a lot better off with a pistol than I would be with a sword.
Hey, look, you're an American. It's in your
Yeah,
blood, man.
it is
You just
indeed.
can't get over guns. Like it's
No,
yeah.
no, I don't know. That didn't stop Hitch from coming over here and and becoming a citizen. But no, we like our guns, and I come from one of those family backgrounds where
Mm,
I mean I shot my first gun when I was a little kid.
yeah.
So
I do. I am interested in guns. In all fairness, I would probably love to have some if I could. I mean, I have an air rifle if that counts for anything.
yeah,
Um, and and that's really fun. And I love being, it's a sniper sort of rifle. And I love that. It's really fun. I would have a few guns, I expect, if I lived in America. I just love the aesthetic. I also like the history of some guns, from World War II.
yeah.
I love the Musanagats, if that's how you pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, the carbine's a classic. Um, the Car 98, I quite like that one, an American one. Um, I mean, I am wondering though. I have never heard Hitchens say anything about guns, to be honest. Uh,
I don't know if he ever made a. I don't know if he ever made a long comment on that. I'm sure he probably did. I turned
mm,
around there and looked up because I have the Quotable Hitchins sitting above me on the
yeah, I want to
shelf
get
back
that
there,
one
and I
actually. Yeah,
was almost tempted to turn to that page and see if he had anything. I'll grab it
go
actually. Let
ahead.
me
Yeah, go ahead.
weasel my way out of my spot here. Oh, it's not going. It's not going well.
I
This is a very
Oh
informal
yeah,
podcast.
it's the same. It's the same size as the Portable Atheist, which was really appealing to me. I really want to get that. I flicked through it in like not a library, but like a bookstore or a bookshop, if I'm going to be honest to my heritage. But I do want to get the Quotable Hitchins. Uh, it looks good.
It's wonderful because sometimes if I'm writing and I'm looking for quotations about a certain thing, and I know Hitch has referred to, and I can't remember where it was from, but I can like think of the quote. Oftentimes I can find it in here if I go to the topic, and then I know
Yeah,
where exactly it was, and I can find the speech or
yeah,
the the piece and where
yeah.
it was published, and actually find the original bit. Yes, he does. He has 4 entries for guns. Should I
Wow.
read a couple?
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's see. The first one is, I have gradually come to think that there is something truly admirable in a country that codifies the responsibility for self-defense. Pity it doesn't make use of it. That was in the Nation Minority Report in January of '94, a month before I was
94.
born.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I
that's
think there's a certain truth to that. I mean, without it being practically applied in a consistent and useful way, like anything, it's bound to fail, bound to be uh, a flop of a theory, let's say.
yeah, it's very true. Um, yeah, I don't know the exact content or the context to what he's referring to, especially about making use of it. But it's wild. I mean, in terms of the use of it of folks in general through COVID, the number of people who bought guns or registered gun owners went
Mm.
through the roof in the United States. It was there were numerous articles published about that, um, which is somewhat scary to think about because folks tend to buy them and then they just sit and they don't go and practice and learn how to use them properly and
Yeah,
run through the gamut with it. But
yeah.
yeah, it's everywhere, absolutely. Let's see what the second one is here. Let's see here. If you take the Second Amendment as a whole, which the National Rifle Association and the political conservatives generally do not, it can be understood as enshrining the right, if not indeed the duty, of citizens to defend their country and themselves from aggression, including aggression from the government. The time might come when the people might have to muster against the state. Well, what's wrong with that?
And when was that?
That was Minority Report again. That's from the same entry. Actually, it looks like 3 of the 4 entries are all from that same article.
Oh, okay.
The
So he has
Yeah,
one. Okay, okay.
that
So he
must
must.
be his
Yeah,
his primary piece on it. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the last one from that section is short, and it says, "Of course, guns kill people. That's why the people should take control of the guns." So very interesting. He was funny like that though, wasn't he? In that, and this is why one of the many reasons I admired him. But that if you suggested an issue, so in this case, gun control or even just firearms, and you know, a population of folks in a state owning firearms, and you asked him about it, you weren't sure what you would get. I think he was so original in that way. Or if you
Mm,
asked him about abortion or about this,
yeah.
and you saw where he was writing and what he was writing about, you weren't really sure what you were going to get when it came to Hitch. He kind of had his own opinion really about everything.
Yeah, and I think that's something to aspire to, but it's also something very difficult because the problem with, I guess, striving to have an opinion on everything is having an opinion on everything, but the expense of that is it being a low resolution opinion on everything. And I guess that's the hardest thing to achieve, which is to have a high resolution opinion on everything. I mean, that is near impossible, maybe impossible, because there has to be some sort of, you have to really tunnel in on what you want to specialize in. Um, and I guess Hitch did it in his own way, but yeah, but I think the way that you say something sometimes carries more weight than what you say, especially when you're live on air or in a debate. I mean, to be honest with you, like as much as I love debates, it is mostly. I mean, I don't know. I kind of think this half, but I also don't. But it's kind of this intellectual exercise that is not always for the greater good of the audience, but just a circle jerk, basically, for
Yeah.
themselves. And I think the Hitch was was not exempt from that, probably, but I think none of us are in some regards. Like, there's nothing wrong with nourishing and absorbing in our own the positives of our being, I guess, of what we're passionate about, and expressing that in a way that we feel happy. And I think there comes a point where it becomes arrogant and it might become um, overdone. But the fact that Hitch might say something that is completely ridiculous, but because his rhetoric was so strong, it wouldn't seem ridiculous. It would seem like the most convincing thing you've ever heard in your entire life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and just on a technical level, I respect that. Like, not the fact that somebody in itself, they might say something false, but it's actually, and this is what a lot of people don't get about Hitchens. They say, oh well, what he said might not be true. But I'm like, okay, fair enough. But don't you think how he said it, and his rhetoric and how he composed himself was admirable? And they slither around and say, oh well, I don't know. It's like, you have to give the devil its due. Like, and a lot of people do, like Rabbi Wolff,
Mm.
Turek. These guys do understand that Hitchens was admirable in his own way. And I think anybody denying that is clearly resentful and bitter, like George Galloway. Um,
Yes. Yeah, that's sort of the difficulty, isn't it, in being a generalist, or in being someone that is paid to speak on a variety of issues, right? And I think that touches on an important cultural point that we're seeing right now. Um, uh, Certain examples I'll stray away from, but in that no one can have an opinion on anything unless they have a PhD,
yeah,
or
fuck
like officially a representative of that field of science or that field of whatever it is, which I think is incredibly absurd, based on just my first line of reasoning, and that is, you can have a PhD in economics, and many do, and there are folks who have those and are strict capitalists, and those who have them that are socialists.
that.
So why is it that obviously it's just an appeal to an authority,
Yeah.
in that case, but that's kind of the struggle of being a generalist, is that you are paid to speak or like to speak, on a wide variety of issues. But like you said, I think Hitch, not only, sometimes he wouldn't have, like what you said, like a high resolution opinion, but he at least had like a feeling, like he had thought about it, and it was just admirable to see someone speak who didn't simply just you know uh, you could just check off on the list. Like, so many people I feel like you see are just, if they're liberal, then exactly what they're going to say. Like, you may have friends on your Facebook feed or friends here, and you just know what their issue, like they're going to be against this, against that. They're just perfectly in the party line, right? And there's
Mm.
Republicans that are the same way, perfectly on the party line. um and like you said, you don't need a deep, well thought out, formulated opinion, but just like, what's your general take on it, in terms of just, surely you've thought about it just a little bit. Like, I do believe somewhere, Hitch wrote of abortion that it just made him terribly uncomfortable, or something like that. I'm sure someone will correct me. But to say he had this feeling about, anytime he thought about it, it was just like this uncomfortable sort of feeling around it, which is not, of course, the left wing line on abortion. And To speak frankly, it's probably where I fall on it. I'm just like, something where it makes me quite uncomfortable to think about having to do, or take upon myself, or just how much it happens all the time.
Mm.
Maybe that's my evangelical casting in my background coming out, right? Um, but Yeah, is that something that you see, just like in his take on different things? It's just refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, jack of all trades, master of none, as the saying goes. But you know, I think what you said is true. Like, I've come across many people who, I don't know, might be an academic, or they might be You know, there might. I mean, Richard Wolff, for example, when he said about somebody who's studying economics, like Richard Wolff is a famous Marxist, I believe, or maybe a socialist. I can't remember. I think he's a Marxist. Um, and he's got it, and he's got a a PhD and all that in this sort of subject, and so clearly he thinks he's right in what he's saying, and clearly what matters is the interpretation of the facts, not the facts themselves. You know, because I was very misled, for example, about the Black Lives Matter movement. I was like, immediately, I was like, okay, well, what are the statistics? And I looked at the statistics, and it showed that, well, from what it like blankly said, basically said that black people commit more crime, therefore they are the problem. And I was like, okay, and I took that at face value for a bit, and then I thought there's something up there, that there's something sorry wrong there, and something off. And then I looked into the context of why black people might commit more crime. And then I realized it isn't the facts that matter. It's not necessarily the facts, but it's how you look at the context behind those facts. You know, the cause and effect. What brings people to crime? What motivations do people have to commit crime? Why am I not committing crimes? You know, and all of this can be explained in economical and psychological, political ways. And so it's really the context behind the facts that is most important, not actually the facts themselves. And when Ben Shapiro is like, facts beat feelings, it's like, okay, but feelings give you context for those facts. And if you just spurt that constantly, you're not actually going to give credit where it might be due, you know, because in feelings there's intuition, and with intuition there's often a version of truth. And so if we push intuition away, then the version of truth is being subdued. You know, it's not good. Context is important, and different forms of information are important. And you know, it's easy to hand wave it away, but we shouldn't. I don't think.
No, it's 100% true. Yeah, in the Black Lives Matter movement, that as a whole, the narrative around that has been, the facts have been. I mean, that's just a mess. It's an absolute absolute mess.
I mean, Martin Luther King even said that. Do I believe? I'm paraphrasing, but do I believe in riots? No. But do I think that people come to a certain point in their struggle that they have to commit something atrocious and destructive to prove a point and to get people to listen? Yeah, I think there comes a point when people have to do that. And so even he said he doesn't believe in that. But the reason why people are doing it is, quite frankly, because they're on the edge. You know, so even we have him kind of giving his own subtext on that.
Yeah, and that all ties right into to just the whole. I mean, the emergence of identity politics as a whole, and that whole manner of things. And I do believe there's a wonderful quote in here actually as well, which isn't far from where we're already at, about identity politics that Hitch once brought up, and I think he saw this coming from the distance. You know, he passed in 2011, but you could see in much of what he was saying, you could see this beginning. And I think it's been going on even since the 90s. When you read some of the books, I just finished not too terribly long ago, Douglas Murray's most recent book, which is, see if I can locate it.
It's not The Madness of Crowds. I
think that's The Madness of Crowds.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's The Madness of Crowds. Okay. Yeah, where he discusses I couldn't remember the title of it. It was escaping me for a moment there. I could only think of the subtitle, and that was brilliant. He sort of traces the history, and you can definitely see it arising in the 90s. In fact, there's another book I have behind me as well that talks about it from the 90s, which is in defense of elitism. That was a very interesting book that was written in the 90s, that kind of saw some of this coming. The author died shortly after he published it. In fact, it might have been published after he passed away, but he had finished the book.
Hmm.
I just thought a book entitled "In Defense of Elitism" had to be worth the read, and so I had to give that a perusal. Um, but let's just do a little selection here of identity politics from Hitch. So identity politics are a drag, aren't they? Forcing people to think with their genitalia or their epidermis. That's a good one. Um, or how about people who think with their epidermis or their genitalia or their clan are the problem to begin with? One does not banish this specter by invoking it. If I would not vote against someone on the grounds of race or gender alone, then by the exact same token, I would not cast a vote in his or her favor for the identical reason. And that's from The Perils of Identity Politics, Wall Street Journal, 2008. That second one.
Wow. I think I remember. I think I remember one actually, which I'll need to get up my Crystal Hitchens quote list.
Do you have one? Do you have one saved?
I I'll show you.
Oh my lord.
Yeah.
So for those who are just listening, James is on his 6th or 7th swipe through the list of quotes here. That's quite considerable.
What actually talking about before I get to that, talking about one of my one of our sort of favorite moments. Um, one of my favorite quotes from him is the following: Donald Trump, ludicrous figure, but at least he's lived it up a bit in the real world, and at least he's worked out how to cover 90% of his skull with 30% of his hair. London Review of Books, 2000.
Oh my god! Could you imagine if he knew what would happen with Donald Trump in the United States? It's just so sad. I could cry. I could cry just thinking about it. What he would think, and just the fact that we can't see it. It's such a letdown. It's so disappointing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and not
and
even.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, not even just because I want to know what to think about it. Like I don't look at Hitch as I think many people like look at their idols, and that like I share every opinion with him. I actually don't. I think I admire the man more for his personality, um, and just the way in which he lived his life
Yeah.
versus his series of opinions. It was the way in which he thought, and that was his whole method. Was like how does someone think is a better indication of who they are than what they think, and that is so much that is what he taught me. I think in an essence, rather than I wish he was around because I want to see him perform and see what he thinks, but not so I can just be like, oh, here's my opinion,
Yeah,
because here's
exactly.
that. Absolutely.
I at the end of one of my essays for university, I quoted Letters to a Young Contrarian when he says I think it's the essence of the independent mind lies in not what it thinks but how it thinks, and
Yes.
I love that, and I think you were paraphrasing that there.
Yes.
It's I mean, Letters to a Young Contrarian is really underrated. Like it's got so much good stuff. I mean, I must say though, I mean, I did read it maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and I didn't get most of the book honestly because it is cool. It's about things that are in the past, but the things where he was making these intellectual anecdotes, I was all over that. Like it's so good. I have two quotes here actually, so both on the same subject of the modern climate, let's just say. So, freedom of expression must include a license to offend. He said that on IQ Square 2006, and this is the sort of one that I think is a good prediction actually. When Dr. Samuel Johnson had finished his great lexicography, the first real English dictionary, he was visited by various delegations of people to congratulate him, including a delegation of London's respectable womanhood, who came to his parlour in Fleet Street and said, "Doctor, we congratulate you on your decision to exclude all indecent words from your dictionary." And he said, "Ladies, I congratulate you on your persistence in looking them up. If people are determined to be offended, there's nothing you can do about that."
No,
Brilliant.
absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yes, I love both of those dearly.
Yeah. Brilliant.
the crowd reaction to the latter
Yes.
was very
Yeah.
good.
It's like a
Was
million view YouTube video, isn't it? Like 1 minute. It's great.
Yes, that's really the essence of climbing on a ladder to see into your neighbor's window to be offended by what they do in the bedroom, right? It's like the essence of going out of your way to be offended. But yeah, nowadays if you're offensive, you're deleted. I mean, that's the end of it, right? That's the end of your
Yeah.
Twitter account or
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
It's funny talking about um liking somebody's ideas or liking them as an individual, like Hitchens, and the idea that you don't have to agree with everything that they say or thought. And last week I was sort of at a dinner with family and my brother. Um, the gender pay gap basically came up, not from me, but
Mm,
from somebody else in the conversation. And my brother was like, "Yeah, don't talk to James about that. He'll just he would just, I don't know what he said, like regurgitate some Jordan Peterson stuff." And I turned to him, I was just like, do you not get the fact that just because I listen to somebody sometimes, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that they say. Um, and so it's that sort of situation where there's just so much misunderstanding. Like you can't, like, and I get this from people a lot about Hitchens in particular. Like like, oh, you must agree with all of this, and you condone all of his bad arguments, let's say. And it's just like, no. Like with the Bible, for example, I take what's interesting, metaphorical, culturally significant, the architecture. I love all of that. I love all the culture. I love all of that. But that doesn't mean I condone slavery. That doesn't mean I condone all of these other things. And what people don't seem to understand, again, it's low resolution thinking. What people don't get to understand, seem to understand, is that you can admire somebody merely for one attribute, or two, or three, not necessarily all of them. And I don't know if this is people half trolling or if people are genuinely that closed-minded or dull. Um, but it's just repetitive at this point. Just having to say, look, I don't, just because I like a writer, just because I like Hitchens, just because I like Peterson, that doesn't mean I agree with him on God. That doesn't mean I condone how vague he is on religion. That doesn't condone all this.
sure.
It's repetitive and it's
Yeah.
irritating.
Yeah, it is. It is, but it's unbelievable to me how many people won't even engage with an individual simply because they know that they don't fall on the same side of the line as them. Like you
Hmm.
said, I love David Bentley Hart, for example.
Yeah.
Great in video, great prose, and beautiful writer, great personality. I greatly admire the man. Of course, I have a litany of differences with him. Of course, but I still really like him. It's just funny that folks don't seem to have. It's just the utter lack of nuance. I just continually this comes up in conversations with some of my friends and just folks that I talk to, where it's just so many people have this complete lack of nuance. And like you said, you just because you like someone, you can like them for one thing. We're also disliking people for just one thing.
Hmm.
You can cancel someone over just one tiny aspect of their existence. And I don't know about you, but I have found in my life that humans are so incredibly complex and full of just history and trauma and where were born and how they were brought up. That if you're going to write somebody off just for one negative quality, even if to you that's the cardinal sin, that's the line. You're going to have a hard time finding friends. In my own experience, going to a Christian university and having a vast majority of my family and friends are evangelicals. So many of them believe things that I don't believe, or they might have certain beliefs about gay people that I don't share at all. But to say I'm going to not speak to my parents anymore because of this belief they have or that belief, or to say they're an entirely terrible person because they believe this thing about religion or this thing about people, it's very difficult to live that way. And I think it's also just a very hateful way to live.
Yeah.
And so I try not to do that on my own side. When someone says something that, like, really pushes my buttons, I'm like, okay, don't let this completely skew your view of them as a person just because they said X comment about non-believers or this or whatever. I don't know. Talk to me a little bit about that. Do you find that in your own? your own life, James?
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I've noticed, like you, just the amount of black and white thinking that people seem to have, and I mean, how I view other people. I mean, it's in regard to what you said. Yeah, I mean, look, I when you study psychology, you start to realize that people do things for a reason. And as hard as it is, you have to understand that even if somebody's being a complete asshole to you, they are doing that for a reason. They might be insecure, they might have had a bad day. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I find myself, if anything, being too sympathetic to that theory. Um, and I don't think it can be refuted because there's no one that I've ever come across that has been rude to me or anything like that, provided I've known them personally, that I couldn't sit back and instantly realize, after recollection, that is, like, yeah, there's clearly things about their life or their personality that would mean that it's more probable that they would get angry in this situation, or they would feel resentment. And the most difficult part of that is to try and, because there's the fine line between, I don't know, because I'm sympathetic towards that, but at the same time you have to do something about it at some point, and I'm quite bad at that. I'm still trying to learn, like, at what point do I blame somebody for something? At what point
Yeah.
do I say, look, you've done something wrong, or like, that this is unforgivable? Because in my head it's like, I don't intrinsically believe that, because people individually are going through and have been through so much, and so I just find myself it's very difficult to
It
blame
is.
people.
It's
um
yeah.
yeah, just I mean, on a
It's
psychological level, just it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's really hard to kind of draw those lines because I know I think you've read like Sam Harris's Free Will, correct?
Yeah,
Or you've at least come across, yeah.
yeah,
So you think about things like that, and then you look out into the world, and or you, like you said, just study psychology, and then you interact with people. And I often find that I agree with so many of those. Like I know those things, but then when it comes to my like pragmatism and my like way about life, I then just I'll go into my little Jordan Peterson rant about cleaning your own bed and being responsible
yeah.
for your own life and getting your life together. Um, and it's a weird balance between those two things. I always try to, you know, I always think that people have to change themselves. They have to be the one to make the right choices, and you cannot change anyone. They have to make those changes. You can empower them to the upteenth degree, but if they don't act as an independent, autonomous individual, nothing ever changes. And so it's a weird balance, but at the same time, I think that one of the famous Harris lines from that book is, if you changed bodies with them cell for cell, like you would be making those exact same decisions.
Yeah.
And to juggle those two things at the same time is very difficult. It's very difficult to do. I think about that a lot. I just consider friends and their decisions and the way they choose to live their life. And I'm like, what is one to do about that?
Everything that we've experienced, whether voluntarily or not, has led up to this present moment. And when you come into the wide arena of how much people have experienced and the degrees of which they've experienced things, it's just hard to be surprised at how people act sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, it's understandable if somebody's bitter and hateful. I like it's understandable. Like, I get why they are like that. And it's hard because you can't dictate. You can only show someone a door, and I guess trust them to walk
Yeah.
and open it and go through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
I
it's
mean,
it's like one of those.
yeah. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Uh,
Okay. Okay. It's like when you it's funny because I often just think about my own just upbringing or whatever, and I was very blessed with like a great family environment, and then I hear things like from other friends or just from other people, and it's just almost unfathomable to me. How one would react and grow in those certain situations. But then at the same time, like people, to I don't want to say to make it, but to like to do well in life, to be prosperous, to to be fruitful, to have friends, and to have a job that you enjoy, and to just be happy, when you wake up in the morning, or even not happy, but just maybe fulfilled would be a better word. There's
Mm,
similar behaviors in certain things that one has to undertake. That no matter if you come from the most privileged of backgrounds or the most horrible of backgrounds, those same, whether it's disciplines, or actions or mindsets, are universal. And so while you might be easy to hammer at home with some individual who grew up in a great environment, it's also the unfortunate truth that those same truths are going to help the person who grew up in a terrible environment. So I don't know
mm.
if it's the delivery that has to change, or how we ingrain those in people. I don't know. It's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, I mean, people are receptive to all different kinds of advice or education. I mean, the education system right now is you get a bird, you get an elephant, you get a giraffe, and a monkey to climb a tree, right? And
Yeah.
you judge the elephant for not being able to climb the tree.
Right.
It's like, what did you expect? And
Yeah.
and in all fairness, I think before you criticize the system, you have to understand how you would alternatively change it. And I think that's a very difficult task, and I have no idea. I mean, I have
Yeah.
suggestions, but I'm not in a sort of position to even understand that. And so, on one
Right.
hand, we have to kind of, again, give sympathy in the fact that, like, clearly this is the most feasible way of doing things. Otherwise, it would be otherwise. Now, of course, there can be financial incentives and disingenuousness, and fair enough, that will always be true. But if somebody has a better idea, then where are they? Um,
Yeah.
not to
And
go into politics too much, but that's kind of one reason why this whole socialism thing is like, oh, well, socialism hasn't worked yet. It's like, okay, like you can say that because it's an unfalsifiable claim. Go ahead, man. Just go ahead, but demonstrate that it will work, and demonstrate that it will work with less casualties than what capitalism already has under its belt, which is quite a lot. I don't think either is innocent. I'm pretty on the fence. I don't know enough about it to take a side yet. I mean, I do have a side, but I don't hold that side with the vigor that I would if I knew more about it, basically. But both sides of the spectrum are guilty. And again, it just comes back to the same thing. It's like, pick a side. You have to be in a box. Like, I kind
yeah.
of understand them in a way, because people are trying to box him in, or they were trying to box him in. They were trying to say, are you a racist? Do you believe in God? And it's like, okay, fair enough. Like, he could answer the question more consistently, more concisely, but in all fairness, that is part of the motive, is to box you in. And that's what politically, and even sociologically, that's what we're always being pushed against this box. Oh, you're upper class, you're middle class, you're lower class. It's like, I'm an individual. Like Bruce Lee, when he was interviewed in America, like, I don't know what year it was, but obviously before he died, and later in his life. And the interviewer said, "Would you consider yourself an American?" And he said, "I consider myself as a human being." And that always stuck with me, because like it's basically just manifesting what I just said. It's really just taking a step back and denying and negating all of these boxes and all of these ticked boxes, that are trying to be in place. All of these procedures that are trying to um, shove people in to being and to thinking in certain ways. Um, yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So what you just said here, I completely agree, and I'll give Hitch another voice here.
sure.
Um, this is under the race and racism in the Quotable Hitchins. For years, when I went to renew my annual pass at the United States Senate, I was made to fill in two forms. The first asked me for my biographical details, and the second stipulated that I had signed the former under penalty of perjury. I was grateful for the latter form because when asked to state my race, I always put human in the required box.
Hitch knew what was up. I've never heard of that
Yeah,
one, Riley.
you
Never
never
heard
heard of
of
that
that one.
one?
I've never heard of that one, man.
Yes,
Oh,
I knew that would be in this if I looked under
yeah.
that title.
Great.
Yeah, he didn't like those lines either, right? And that's the thing. If someone can label you, then they know what to do with you in their brain. They know where to
Yes.
put you, and that's an easy way of thinking. It's a lazy, more specifically, way of thinking. Um, and it just goes right back to what we said about keeping the party line. If they can sit you right in that, then um, they know just what to do with you. Um, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's difficult though to it's how we're also we need to think as human beings. Like we have to get things laid out a certain way in order to move in the world,
Yeah.
right? Peterson talks a lot
Yeah.
about that. Like we have to get things to where we understand them in order to do anything at all. So again, it is like a balancing act though, right? It's you need to balance between the 2 points, between the two of those points. And yeah, I think that's something you don't even see necessarily a lot of. I think a lot of the atheist community is guilty of that, where a lot of the atheists you meet are just like can't say a good word about anything about religion or about the Bible, about anything, and it's eminently frustrating to me to come across folks like that, because I'm like you're just like the folks on the other side here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's and I think it extends not only to militant atheism, but also just politics or just personal life. Like people are militant about a lot of things, and then they blame other people for being militant about things. It's like, okay, you have your side, but don't blame somebody else for being militant about something when you yourself are clearly militant about it. I mean, going back to the sort of the shapes point and everything like that, it's like we are meaning creatures. We look for shapes when they're not there, even, which is the
Yeah,
emergence of faith, which maybe you can go into a bit, but I don't know. But I think this all stems back to our biological imperatives, our predispositions, which is we search for shapes. And that extends to what I said before, such as trying to construct boxes and put things neatly in one box and another, and try and essentially just make meaning and coherence out of what we perceive. And as I alluded to, like with religion, that's a prime example. Like people, no, because Christians often say to me, "Do you think the apostles were lying? Do you think they made it up? Do you think they died? Um, do you think they really died for a false belief?" And I say probably like you would, Riley, which is just because somebody dies for a belief doesn't entail that belief is true. And then I reference jihad bombers, and I'm like, is Islam true? We're in a bit of a problem here. So
yeah,
it's the same sort of thing.
it is. Yeah, there's modern day miracle workers. I mean, and I say modern day, I mean the last hundred years that have thousands of followers and believers. That carry the faith their whole life, and I'm sure some of them have died for what they believe. And yeah, that line of argumentation, I so many lines of within religious argumentation. I find that if they would just relate those same lines of thinking to the religion next door, they would then not use that line of argumentation. That's not for every religious argument, but so many of them, especially when it comes to the fact checking. Um, it's rather unbelievable, how that happens there. I just saw a funny Instagram post, and I don't know who shared it, but it was like something about the moon, and they had seen like a crack in the moon, and a Muslim had like said something about
Oh,
being like,
okay.
where this is where Muhammad split the moon in half,
Yeah.
right? Writing on the ass. And I was like, oh, I hope that's not a real. I hope that's satire.
Yeah, well, the I mean the apostles thought that they uh, followers and I guess first-hand accounts and people who thought they saw Jesus resurrect and so on. I mean, they were all convinced that he would return in their lifetime.
Right.
And as Hitchens
Yes.
said himself, he's a bit late. He's 2,000 years
Yes.
late, nearly. Um, yeah, it just begs the question, like, how long are you willing to wait until you admit something's up? But that's the thing. That's the thing, and I'm sure you'd agree with me here, which is pulling at hope. Hope is one of the most corruptible and profitable currencies of human beings. Self-help books. You know, if you read this, you'll change, and then you read it hoping that you will. You buy it hoping that you will. You know, we hope so much, and religion. Not to say that it's singularly fueled on this, because I would never make such a outlandish militant atheism sort of mediocre claim, like, oh, it's, you know, oh, religion is just a coping mechanism. It's like, I don't personally believe that. I mean, it can be. Is that all it is? Hell no. Of course not.
No.
But there's more to it. There's just more to it than that. But
Yeah.
what really
Hard.
should get us to question things and to raise our eyebrow is the cumulative case of, like, how again, how unfalsifiable this hope is that he will return, and all things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It is quite hard. I mean, hope is the at many times, you know, this is what the criticism is of wish thinking, right? That religion is wish thinking, and I think in many ways that is true, but it certainly isn't the singular motivation behind it, right? And going back also to the apostles, every time that case gets brought up of, you know, the witnesses and all that, my first objection is always, this is all operating on the assumption that what you're reading actually happened and that people actually died for this, right? And then these are reliable accounts, right? And that goes into the synoptic problem of why is it that why is it that Matthew and Luke relied so heavily on Mark and his gospel? Why did they more or less just, in so many cases, it's verbatim in their own accounts, and then they added to it. You know, if you were supposedly an eyewitness, why would you not write an account in your own words? Very, very, very suspect. Yeah. So that's always my first objection to that, is how do we even get to this level of assumption? But yeah, so that's a whole other debate about, you know, the veracity and the accuracy of what's being written down.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think another thing that Hitchens once said, which was, paraphrasing, what's more likely, a virgin birth genuinely happened, or a peasant woman told a little fib? It's like, you know, we're basically, in other words, were the laws of nature suspended in this one woman's favor, or did she just lie? I mean, yes. Intuitively speaking, is that really that difficult to decide upon the conclusion that it was false? Like you said, a whole lot weighs on those gospels. I mean, they can't even decide on the genealogy of Jesus, for Christ's sake. I mean, it's part of the pun. I didn't actually wasn't intended, but you know.
Yeah, and I mean, and that just, you could further that from divine pregnancy versus fib. You could then do it fibbing versus the creation of myth. I mean, what is more likely, that a gal lied and this just came out of nowhere, or that someone somewhere was writing religious material or biographical material, not biographical, but religious, you know, pamphleting, and decided to use a theme which has been common long before Jesus, the idea of a miraculous birth or a miraculous consumption, or a consumption without a second party. That is a common theme throughout world religion, but also specifically can be found in Roman thinking and in the Roman gods. So is it more likely that this person borrowed from the culture and that is more the motivation of this writing,
Mm.
or that a gal fibbed and then that blew up and became that? It could be both, could be a little of both,
Yeah.
right? But I'd say either of those are more likely than the fact that one night she was startled in her sleep by, um, the divine creator, and the next thing she knew, she was just getting, impregnated. However that happened.
Always find it quite ironic when Christians criticize Islam, saying that it's just a copy of myths before it. How do you think Christianity came about? Like,
yes, those folks are not read up on their Zoroastrianism or their Torah, right?
apparently not. Yeah.
No. Yes, they don't know. They should read about the history of their devil, where that came from and how that developed, and how much the Babylonian captivity influenced the Jewish thinking, and then so seamlessly led into sort of this the thinking that you see in what we call the New Testament.
Yeah, take some of the Jewish predictions. Well, I've talked to a Jew and they deny any of these predictions and even deny they're in the Torah, which I found quite interesting. But
Yeah.
the Messiah will ride on an ass. How many people ride on an ass 2,000 years ago into Bethlehem? Is
Yes.
that so much of an extraordinary claim?
No. And
Is it an extraordinary prediction? I really doubt that.
yeah, and not to mention that the very fact that prediction is plucked out of I'm going to get the book wrong, so I'm not going to say it. But so many of the Old Testament, I believe that one in particular is from Matthew, and so many of Matthew's so-called fulfillment prophecies are places he is just reading in the Old Testament. He's finding these, these verses, and then he is writing his own. He's writing back into them. He's using them and saying, "Oh, well, this aligns perfectly with this." And if you read those verses in context, many of them aren't even predictive in nature. And then there's the famous mistranslation of Alma, or a virgin, and the fact that it just means young woman. Like all these things you look into. And actually, my last podcast, which now has been a little bit because Riley has been missing. He's been on hiatus. But with Dr. Price, we talk about this specifically in the book Gospel Fictions by Randall Helms. We talk about this specifically in part of the podcast, where we just amazed at Matthew's just seemingly freedom to just go into the Old Testament and pluck something out and then just be like, oh, and this was done in fulfillment of this this scripture. You're completely right. Not only is it not exceptional and that many people could have done this, but also many times these verses are completely removed from context and then used to the author's whim.
I guess being the devil's advocate, I'm thinking. Just out of curiosity, if you could explain this on a deeper level, but is there any evidence to suggest that that's the case over the contrary, over that maybe there were genuine predictions?
Is there any evidence that the predictions were, well, I guess I better frame this question, that the predictions did come true, or that they were written specifically as predictions? Which one am I going with here?
Is there any evidence, let's say, that points to the fact that they were manipulated, the texts were manipulated, like you suggest? Because I'm just wondering, of what someone would reply to that, and I really don't know actually. But obviously you've read the piece and talked to Price, so I'm just wondering if he said anything about that or any more information for my own interest anyway.
Yeah, so I guess part of the argument for that is that Helms make, and the reason I read Helms is because it was highly recommended by Dr. Price. So I have a little section highlighted here, for example, that reads, Indeed, he had already corrected Mark many times before, often doing so on the basis of what he regarded as his superior understanding of the oracles of in the Old Testament. So we're speaking of Matthew here.
Mm-hmm.
For since Jesus' life happened according to the scriptures, right? That's the English translation of what you read before one of these predictions occurred. Early Christians were confident that in order to find out about him, they need not to engage in historical research or consult witnesses in our understanding of these two approaches. They found detailed history in the ancient oracles of the Hebrew Bible read as a book about Jesus. So here's what Helms is arguing, and what also Price, not to put words in his mouth, but what I think he would also say is that they were reading back looking for these things. This is not something that they were, for generations, people, some of these were somewhat predicatory in nature, but many of these oracles were simply just from verses that had context. They have their own context in the book, in the Old Testament. They were written about, what that author is writing about at the time. They have either historical or literary context. And what you find in Matthew is his seeming ability to just pluck from them and pull it out in order to create this narrative of his idea of Jesus, which, of course, if you've read the New Testament, Matthew's idea of Jesus is not quite what Mark's is. Luke's is not quite what theirs is. And then John is, John being the latest written, the myth has developed. I mean, he is, Christ has become God. The Word has become flesh. Like, they're completely one. Yeah, so there's another quote in here that says, before they wrote the New Testament, Christians created another entirely new book, the Old Testament, turning the Septuagint, or the Greek Old Testament, into a book about Jesus by remarkably audacious and creative interpretations, meanings it had held for generations of Jews. Its historical and poetic content especially ceased to exist. It became not a book about the past, but about its own future. So I won't just sit here and read quotes all day, but I'd say
beautifully worded.
Yeah, wonderfully worded. This is a really great book for those who haven't read it. It's not a very popular book. Like, it's not a Bart Ehrman, book, but it's wonderfully written. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's a brilliant bit about how the Old Testament was used as foundational material to write the New. And this extends not just from the oracular or the oracles in the Old Testament. This even goes to some of the miracles that are recorded. So if you look at the miracle of, for example, when Christ is approached, and he goes and heals the centurion's daughter, that story is so close to an Old Testament healing by Elijah. Could be Elijah. I believe it's Elijah. That it is word for word in some places. The Greek is identical to copies of the Septuagint we have from the Old Testament about this miraculous healing that Elijah does. It's word for word in some areas in Matthew. I mean, it's clearly just been copied over and slight details changed to fit Jesus. And this was something I had no idea about until I first came across this idea, I think from Dr. Price, maybe from Myth Vision. Shout out to Derek over there, a previous guest that has been on Tao Society here. But that was just mind-blowing to me when I first heard that. I never came across that, unsurprisingly, in Bible college. But it's an amazing, the parallels between the two.
What's the name of the book again?
It is Gospel Fictions by Randall Helms. And I wish I had it bookmarked here, the little bit about that compares the two of them, but I don't. I only have certain little sticky notes. Yeah, and it's an unbelievable. His parallels between some of these miracle stories and their events in the Old Testament, and other events in the New Testament, specifically in Matthew, and how similar it is to some of these accounts that Elijah did. It's unbelievable. It's mind-blowing. And I mean, it is for sure word for word in some places how he's just like, oh, we'll just make Jesus do this on this day. And it's multiple lines within the stories match up incredibly. And it's in the Greek. We're looking at this in the Greek. It's not even like the English translations match up. So it's the Septuagint and what we think are, obviously the originals, or as close to the originals as we can get. So highly recommend that to everyone. that's that's I think all this came from the idea that when we talk about the New Testament, people just assume like the veracity of so much that it actually happened. And this is why my first objection is always like, hold on, hold on, hold on. We can't even get to there. So why are we building arguments off of a premise that no one has agreed on yet?
Mm,
At least that
that's
I mean, so
debatable.
many
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so many scholars I think
I,
haven't agreed
so
on yet.
so building on that, I have a follow-up question because I'm genuinely interested in your thought process here. Like, so those texts being looked at and then compared and then actually intertwined. Do you think that that was disingenuous, like directly? Just do you think they knew what they were doing, or do you think they were so blinded by their faith in what they thought was Jesus and their revelations that they thought genuinely that what they were doing was true? Because the question is, if it's the former, then what motive would they have to lie to themselves? So it must in turn be the latter. So I'm just interested in hearing what you think about that.
Yeah, oh man, this is another point actually that Dr. Price and I touched on directly. I just to come out and say, oh, they were liars, they were fabricators, they were this or that. I hesitate to do that because it's not just that they were. I mean, I think to a degree they had an idea of what they were doing and may have been a bit dishonest. Bart Ehrman talks about this in Forged, which when even just in the title alone, there's negative connotations. When we hear forged, we think someone did something knowing what they were doing. There's been arguments raised by Christian scholars that certain documents weren't like forgery or copying this or signing. In his case, this the book Forged is mostly about authorship of the New Testament, and it was said that, oh well, signing a letter as someone else wasn't thought to be disingenuous. It was actually a sign of respect. I can't remember what the exact line of argument is, but his is an in context argument against that, saying no, this was done disingenuously. As for the creation of the Gospels, I hate to just look at it and say like it was a lie because it's so hard to know that's putting my mind trying to get inside the mind of the person who wrote it 2,000 years ago and their motivations and why they were doing that. We're just assuming that they think that everyone was going to believe this and it was going to get out and become holy writ, right? And I don't know that that's a safe assumption we can make. So, while I do know in some cases they probably knew that what they were writing wasn't exactly true, I don't know that that was the point to them. I don't know for a fact that what they wanted to write it off and pass it along saying this factually happened, right? You have in Luke, it does sound like that when Luke prefaces his gospel, he's laying out an account of things that he thinks actually happened, but he's pulling from Mark. Did Mark create this just more like as religious literature? Was it creative writing, and it got out of hand? I don't know. So I hesitate to say that it was just flat out fabrication or lies. I think there's more to it than that. But I'm not so much responding or criticizing the author for what they've done. When I make points like this or point out objections of this nature, I am more so replying to the folks that maybe I grew up with, right? The evangelicals who are taking the scripture as word for word truth, as saying this actually happened, as this was true. It's historical. It's those people that I'm saying, hold on now, let's look at this. Let's look at this. And if you want to examine it in a critical eye like that, I'll put on my hat and we can debate it in that way. I think that's a debauchery it's disgraceful to treat scripture in that way. It's like reading Genesis as a literalist and saying that the earth was created in 6 days. It's just, I don't even want to have that argument with someone. I'd much rather talk about the beauty of the text and about the idea that we are made in God's image and what that means to the people who wrote it. I think that's much more interesting. But so often the conversations one has are with literalists, right? They're with fundamentalists, and so you have to kind of put that cap on and take under that approach. So
yeah, I mean, one of my the brilliant responses. You really sold me on that book. Yeah, but I mean I think one of the main things for me that I bring up when I talk to people of any faith, Muslim or I mean, I guess with Muslims, there's less of an interpretation because the Quran is said to be quite literally the word of God. So
Yes.
there's less debate about that. I mean, there's Sunni and Shia, but and the Hadiths. Conveniently, when I recited the Hadith about Aisha, he turned around to me and said, "Oh, he doesn't believe in those particular Hadiths." I was like,
The convenience.
"Convenient, right?" But with Christianity, at least, you can pull the card, which is what makes you so sure that your interpretation is true. And it's just and I come up with the statement, which is like, it's just, why isn't it clearer? Like, why all of this dancing? Why all of this, like, misleading? Like, I mean, as Hitchens himself said, bringing it back, like, um, buggering around with Job to prove a point.
Yeah.
He wouldn't do that. It's like, it's just absurd because I've read Carl Jung's answer to Job, and I really really like that book. It's a very interestingly written book, and I in one way I was like, yeah, okay, look, you're making some logical points here, but at the end of the day I'm just like, okay, but did he really need to do it like that? Did he really need to convince Abraham that he was going to kill his son? Like, that's psychologically damaging. Why are we still being blamed for what our ancestors did? Well, apparently, anyway, Adam and Eve. Like, why are we still being blamed for their sin? Like, yeah, sure, it's embedded in. Well, it's apparently embedded in all of us. Okay, fair enough. But like, why should I still be blamed for that? Why should I even have original sin? Like, it's just all of these questions create more questions rather than satisfactory answers. And of course, you could turn around and say, as a Christian, oh well, God wants you to question all of these things. But then again, the whole dance happens again. It's like, but does he really though? Because when you question God, things don't go too well. Job, for example, it's like all of these turning arounds can happen, all of these conversations can happen. But what at the end of the day is that nobody knows shit. Like, it's completely debatable. Like, it's completely debatable, and again, it's this statement which is either all gods are true, either your God is true, or no gods are true. What do you think is most likely?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, the conclusion to me seems obvious.
Yeah, and I think that's a plus for rhetoric, right? Which is, it's a very, that argument right there is just a very common one, but just a thought experiment alone is very effective, right? It's very effective just to think about that honestly and genuinely with, about those sort of just easy, that's not right. That's not like a super analytically, it's not an analytically, argument for why God doesn't exist, but it's just a very simple line of reasoning to go down. And it genuinely makes one think. And I think what you said about, just the fact that it isn't clear, like, why isn't it clear? Or the notion of original sin, which is of course not even agreed upon universally by all the different Christian places. It's definitely, I mean, it's concerning, and it's made me, and just the way I think about the idea of God, and it's very difficult to conceive of how God would then fault someone for not coming to the right conclusion, because it's just so darn difficult. It's just so open to interpretation, all of it, that even if you were to retain your Christian hat, your Christian identity, and continue along that road, there's just so many ways in which you can fall in, and an Orthodox Russian Christian looks so different from an evangelical fundamentalist that it's just, if God's going to save both of them, well, God's going to save anybody, right? A la David Bentley Hart, maybe, right? So it just becomes a point then of, you just want to throw your hands up and be like, well, then what's the point at all? And I think, and when you talk about Job too, again, that's like a literalist reading of Job, which is supposedly our oldest book in the Bible, the first authored book in the Bible. with what scholars tend to think of it as. And instead of just like reading Job and like kind of looking at the story and like just reading it almost like a Greek epic and like talk about the ideas behind it, like that's how I want to interact when I read that something like that. Or how interesting Satan is in that he is like Satan is like God's. I heard someone say this the other day, and I can't remember who it was, but like talking about how Satan is God's prosecutor in that story, and he's like, "Hey, can I go mess with so and so to see if he still likes you?" And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, go fuck with him a little bit." And so he goes off, and he does a little bit, and he's like comes back, and he's like, "Hey, he still likes you, but I bet if I did this, he'd be like, oh no, screw that guy." And he goes back and does something else. Like that is not the Satan that you get a picture painted of if you grew up in where I did, like right in the Midwest in the United States. That's not Satan doesn't work with God like that. And this like collaborative like duo, dual volleyball team or whatever. Like they don't work together like that. They're like arch enemies, and they don't have conversations like in God's throne room. They're just like on. You know what I mean? So it's very interesting. Job's very interesting, and it's how it shows you a very early look into this idea of like God's adversary or God's like almost like his prosecutor. I think that might be also it is. That's also one of the I'm pulling that from Dr. Price's book, his most recent book, which is let me see if I have it. I can't find it. It's always how many times am I going to turn around in this podcast and like reach for something and then not be able to identify where it is? This is a laid back podcast for the listeners. Yeah. This was it's a spur of the moment, but his most recent book is called Merely Christianity. Obviously a play on C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, and the cover of the book is actually this super similar to the cover of Mere Christianity that came out in like the 70s or 80s or something like that. It looks almost just like it, and that was Dr. Price's way of kind of subtly finger, his little finger poking the ribs. That's just from that like as well, Hitch, though. He traces the history of Satan. It's a good book. You said just like the Hitch in what?
In just being a bit sneaky.
Oh
with his publications, just like the Mother Teresa, the missionary position. No one left to lie to. God is not great.
Yeah. I have to think that part of that was Hitch, and some of it was probably publishers like pushing him. But honestly, Hitch didn't seem like someone who you had to push very hard to make your subtitle be like a subtle jab. I'm sure that was something that Hitch was
why religion poisons everything. I mean, if there's one subtitle that I could think up in my head to make someone pick up a book, that's going to be it. Like, oh, does it poison everything? How does it poison everything? And it's genius. I'm not going to lie, it is genius.
Oh yes, have to have your marketing in line.
And we talked about this before because people have come up like they've talked to me and I've talked to them and they've said like, and look, it's fair. Like Eric, for example, like conscious philosophy. He's a really really great guy. He's awesome to have conversations with.
He is,
and he's like, religion poisons everything. Like, come on. And it's like, I understand and I agree with that, but and I think rightly because I was in doubts per se. I was like, what do you think of this? Like, what do you think of the title? Do you think it does and all this sort of thing? And then we were just talking about Hitchens potentially being disingenuous and all that kind of thing. And then you pointed out to me, I think in the video that I had on my channel about you leaving evangelical Christianity, I think that's it. But you were like, look, you're not supposed to take it literally, a bit like the Bible. Hey, you're not trying to take it literally. It's you have to sort of respect the fact that he was also a journalist. Like, and again, it's context. Like to anyone else, it's fair enough. But with Dawkins, I think he was definitely hamming it up. Although the good delusion, I have no issue with that because I mean, technically speaking, provided atheism is true, although that phrasing kind of puts me off a bit. I mean, William Lane Craig always says, if atheism is true, it's like Hitchens would just turn around and say, but you're getting it wrong. You're getting the wording wrong. Atheism is true. It's just, it's a non-position. Oh yeah, and I also wanted to. I'm just sparring around at the moment, but
That's okay.
I want to ask you a question. We may have talked about this before. I think we have. I don't know if we've done it non-privately, but I'm just still thinking about the burden of proof and like,
oh yes,
because I think anybody even making a claim intellectually should be able to defend that claim. And I'm left thinking, is it true that atheism has a burden of proof, or is it not? Because to give you briefly what my updated thoughts are, I think yes, but at the same time, nobody goes around saying they're a non-stamp collector. So atheism is a negative and theism is a positive. And so I do believe that both should, honestly have their own justifications, the individual, let's say, have their justifications of their belief, but that doesn't mean that belief, that doesn't separate the fact that a proposition is a proposition and a neutrality is a neutrality. But then, I don't know, there are some objections to that, but I'm just going to let you give your thoughts on that.
Sure. Oh man, so my thoughts on this are a little complex, and that's probably because I haven't sorted it out entirely in my own mind. I go back and forth on whether this question is particularly interesting to me or if it's not. I tend to still remain on the side that a greater burden of proof lies on the theist, but I specifically think that is applicable in the case of a true theist and not like a deist. In the true religious believer, I think all religious believers have the burden of proof of their own idea of God, their own conception of God, right? It is not my job to disprove individually the Christian God, the God of Islam, the God of Judaism, the Hindu gods, etc., right? Because those are each unique in their own makeup. And now, Hart and others will argue that the central themes of classical theism are the same, and I think that's fair to an extent. So I think specifically within religions, the burden of proof falls on that individual. Just as to the idea, though, to back it up to deism or to this classical theism idea, when you start getting philosophical about it and you start looking at it from a very just high level perspective of, was there this first cause? Do we have a non-contingent initial contingency that exists forever? Then I start to see okay, I think perhaps I do have a bit of a burden of proof. I think I should engage in that sort of thing. But if we're just talking about, does the standard non-believer Joe Schmo on the street have this burden of proof for why he doesn't believe in God? I don't know. I think, like you said, everyone should have these thought out positions, and they should think critically about everything they do in life, not just their stance on religion or on God, but that he has to have this well formulated defense or rebuttal of Christianity. I don't think so. Or does he have to have this formal rebuttal in his head ready for classical theism at any moment? Does he have to have it also for Islam and for Hinduism? That just to me seems a little wild. I think, like we talked about earlier about rhetoric, I think if you've, you kind of just come across it and God has never really been a factor and you just live your life without it, and you kind of think, hey, like you said, is it more likely that all religions or that one religion is true or that they're all false? Maybe that's very convincing to you as well. Some of the other, I don't want to say surface level or low resolution, but just the simple rhetoric, maybe that's just very convincing to you. And so I don't know that those people need to worry about this constant burden of proof. I know that not everyone is a crazy person like me and you, James, where we ruminate on these things, despite the fact that yes, yeah, right. I think I might have read more theology in the last year than my Christian family did. Maybe not all of them, but I might have been pretty close, right, with my dear Billy Hart and other ones. So I don't know. So that's all that to say, I'm really not 100% sure. I do agree with you though entirely that everyone should deeply think about these things. and why they believe them. It shouldn't be a frivolous thought, but whether it has to be all consuming and it's a burden of proof, I don't know. I think if you're on the street corner and you're a Christian, man, you better have a reason for it though. And if I come talk to you and and it's clear that the disparity is there on just what you know about the faith and whatever, then man, that one rubs me the wrong way. If you're gonna be if you're gonna be a pastor standing up on a stage, you better have a reason for it. Like, you better know if you're gonna be on a street corner. If you're just the average person, whatever. But it's really that. It's like if you're standing up, proclaiming this, that's when I really am like, okay, you better have the burden of proof's on you. It's on you if you're on the soapbox. That's what.
Yeah, but what if they're a presuppositionalist, Riley?
Oh, now you're just being cruel to me. You've been watching.
It's just the presuppositional stuff. It's just, I don't know how it isn't clear to the advocates that it's the definition of circular reasoning, begging the question. It's literally a fallacy. Like, it's an outright logical fallacy. I mean, can you just? I know it will cost you a lot of spiritual energy, Riley, but can you even think of a steel man for that position?
I mean, if it's true. You're just watching me. I'm on my second Johnny Walker and Perrier, and you waited specifically for that moment to bring up presuppositionalism. So I'm going to pull out some Bible college material here. Shout out to James Bealby, thinking about Christian apologetics, what it is and why we do it. He's got a great little blurb on presuppositionalism. So for those who don't know what this is, what is it? Consequently, the authority of Scripture and of Jesus Christ must be presupposed before sense can be made of arguments for the truthfulness of Christianity. Further down, presuppositionalism is an appeal to authority. So what does this mean? This means that you have to accept the authority of Scripture and of who Jesus Christ is, according to the person who's telling you all this, before you can then decide that you can make sense of the arguments for the truthfulness of Christianity. Yes, you can see I'm making circles with my finger just trying to think through this, because it is the definition of circular reasoning. You have to accept the truth of something before the arguments that prop it up make sense to you. I just want to grab the mic and shout "duh" as loud as I possibly can, because is that not anything? Could you not apply the same reasoning to anything? Could I not be a presuppositional atheist and say, if you accept atheism, then all the arguments I'm about to tell you for atheism will make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, well, yes, I could also accept the argument for it's so circular that I can't hardly do it. And we have people like Cornelius Van Til, who's talked about in this, Gordon H. Clark, Francis Schaeffer. I have read my Francis Schaeffer, so don't come for me with the Francis Schaeffer, because I've read the Francis Schaeffer. Lots of folks here who contributed to the creation of presuppositionalism. But a steel man for it, yeah, I guess. I mean, if it's true, I don't know. I can't. And then it's true, I guess, right? Then that's a circular answer. That's my circular steel man.
It's pretty hard to steel man something that is quite literally abusing a fallacy, like, just directly,
Yeah.
It's, but okay, so just to talk to you a bit more, because it's fun. And don't worry, you can ask me some whatever
This is James after hours.
Yeah, just torturing people about bad arguments. Okay, so here's something that I've heard. You blame a presuppositionalist for begging the question, right? But you don't look at an atheist and say, how are you trusting your capacities to think, and how are you trusting your facilities in your mind to give you the truth, and how do you trust rationality, etc., etc. And I guess you could link those two, the presuppositionist to that, because at the end of the day, we are still trusting something to gather our information. So what would your response be to that?
Um, well, first of all, I guess my initial response is that I'm jotting down here. I have rationalism and then an equal sign with a cross through it. Uh, on the other side, atheism. So I don't think that the acceptance of rationalism or the idea that logic and the application of logic leads us to valid pathways of knowledge. I don't think that to accept that premise, it's so de facto atheism is true. I don't think that follows, and I don't make that claim. Um, I think you can be a rationalist um, and be and trust logic and not say that atheism is by default true. So I don't tie those two things together in that sort of unholy matrimony, if you will. I do think that if you're reasoning clearly, more than likely, in my opinion, non-belief, agnosticism, or some sort of atheism, right, is more. It makes more sense to me. But I don't think that the acceptance of rationalism as a form of valid epistemology immediately and always leads to atheism as truth. I don't think those two things are exclusive to each other. What do you think, James?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd agree. I think it's a leap of faith, so to speak, to do that. I think more processing would have to be required because it kind of reminds me of like um when when I guess a theist would say about how an atheist is a naturalist, let's say, and they pretend that they are just, it's self-evident that an atheist would be a naturalist. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe. And then they also, as well as this, assume that the atheist would believe in subjective morality. It's like, not necessarily.
Correct.
Sam Harris is an atheist who believes in objective morality.
Correct.
So it doesn't lead on like theists like it to. And this is something I find quite a bit actually. I mean, firstly, going back to naturalism, it depends what we mean by naturalism, because there are, that's a bit, there are discussions to be had about how we define that. But I guess I just find a lot of the time there's a lot of assumptions about what atheists believe and what they don't believe. For example, Peterson's ridiculous claim, oh, shock horror, I don't believe everything that he says. Whoa. It's that, that an atheist has to be Raskolnikov, like in Crime and Punishment. It's just, I mean, basically an atheist is a murderer.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know how to justify that. That's just there's so many
Yeah.
assumptions within that statement. Like,
There
what,
is.
what
Yeah.
what makes you think that atheist even justifies murder? And then you could say, well, subjective morality, but it's like, but what if they don't believe in subjective morality? So Peterson makes so many assumptions there. And nihilism as well, like conflating nihilism with atheism. It's like,
Hmm.
just because nihilism might be the implications of atheism, that doesn't mean that you must follow them or that you do follow them. Um, yeah, I mean, I mean, if you can build on that, but I guess because I've also heard like atheists can't justify their epistemology. They can't justify. I mean, I guess this goes back to what I said before, but I guess I just want, or maybe a direct response to the epistemological point, which is, Riley, how do we trust our capacities for truth? Like, how do we remotely trust them?
Well, there's a few things you laid on there. I'm jotting my notepad down. So in reverse order,
Yeah,
I think when it comes to yeah, so many atheists don't accept objective morality. So Mackey, for example, I'm currently reading his The Miracle of Theism, which I tracked down from a seller who said there was no markings in it, which is very important and dear to my heart. And I
yeah.
received the book, and it was highlighted in multiple places. So for that person, I'm coming for you. Just know that. But I am working through that. Very analytical. There are math formulas in the book arguing for and against
Oof.
God's existence, which, as we previously noted, James, not my forte.
Yeah.
I love dense philosophy, but when you start adding math equations, I understand the value in it, but maybe I'm making my, I don't know, maybe I'm bashing myself here, but it just starts to lose interest for me, and I don't find it necessary to do that. I'm not a huge analytical philosopher. I don't tend to lean in that direction, but I wanted to read Mackey because he's so well respected. But back to the original point, objective morality. Mackey didn't believe in objective morality. His best known book is a book that describes why he believes in subjective morality. I believe in subjective morality. But do I live like that? Well, that's a whole nother matter.
Yeah.
As for atheism is equal to nihilism or nihilism, it depends what you mean by meaning, right? And I guess in terms of meta meaning, in this, like, you have a place in the universe, it's like divinely inspired. Yes, no, it does then equal that sort of nihilism. Does that mean your life has no meaning? Well, that's a whole discussion. Like, no, I think your life can be full of all sorts of meaning that you create for your own life. So that's kind of my brief, just short thoughts about that. As for our epistemology and how can we trust it, then I don't think, even if you believe in, I think it's kind of circular no matter what, because even if you are a presuppositionalist or someone who believes that God has given you this trustworthy capacity for reasoning and your faculties are working accurately and correctly, that's still sort of like an assumption that you are able to reason properly to get to that point. I don't know. It does get very circular. But as for our epistemology, I guess my primary defense of it is just in terms of pragmatism. It just seems to work, right? When you think about logic, or you think about, the scientific process, right? Repeatability, the ability to build on it. If you're speaking about just from your own experience, anecdotally, if I treat a person this way, how does that end up in my life? If I'm kind to my girlfriend, do I like the outcome to that? Yes, it had a good outcome. And I repeat that over a long period of time. Then to me, I'm like, okay, well, my thought about the world is that if I'm kind to people, things tend to go well for me. And that is, that's how I validate my own epistemology of ways of knowing, how things go well, I suppose. So, philosophically, how do I validate it? I don't know. I think so many, when you get into these sort of conversations, it's almost just like intellectual masturbation at that point. Like, it's just, I'm like, man, I would rather go live. Like, let me just go live. Like, there's a certain point where I love to, I'll go as deep, I think, just about as anybody, but I always have to come out of that and say, like, this is not life. Like, this is not living. And I don't know, for my 70, 80 odd years that I get, how long do I want to spend in that sort of, those sort of circles of reasoning, I suppose. What do you think, James? How does James get his own epistemology?
Oh man, I usually respond with the following statement. To drive a car, we don't have to know exactly how the machines inside the car work. Like, just like, so long as we can drive the car, we're driving the car. And for all intents and purposes, it works. And whilst I'm not satisfied by that, and whilst the theist will dance around and say, I've got this objective card. It's just like, okay, look, you can do that, man. You can do that, but just remember something. You have to subjectively come to the conclusion that your religion was true. We're in the same boat, bud. We're in the same boat. We both have to come, regardless of whether you're a theist or an atheist. You still have to come to a subjective conclusion about which God is true and which interpretation is true. And so, both in the same position. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm actually, the piece that I'm working on, that, well, I was working on before all the kind of things sort of hit the fan in my personal life, and doing this and that, which we've talked about privately, and I've been a little MIA. I'm working on a piece that is sort of addresses that point about the supposed difference between the morality, the moral stance of Christians versus atheists, and how it's really a facade. There really is no difference. We're all making these sort of judgment calls. We're all driving the car, as you would say. And again, yeah, I drive a car. I know how it works. it gets me to where I need to go. That's just like I said. If I treat someone a certain way, I get this result. It's pragmatism, right? It just works, and we know it works. We don't, just because we can't perfectly explain, to the philosophical satisfaction of the he Christian, why it works. I can still show that it does work, and if my own life is fulfilling, because I tend to stray from happiness as a metric for success, but if my own life is fulfilling, and I'm able to spend time with my family and take care of those around me, and I tend to find that people respond well to me, and want to be in my presence. If all those boxes are checked, then I try to just say, that's my epistemology, right? That's how I think about knowledge and the acquisition of knowledge. And honestly, what other choice do we have? We've been given these minds. If we can't trust them, if they're your philosophical positions, we can't trust them, then okay, well then go home. Like you're like, that's the end of your argument. You could sit down. You can write that. You can write a long paper about why we can't trust our faculties. And if that's your argument, then okay. But that's
even that would be a contradiction.
It would. It would.
Because you're coming to a logical conclusion as far as you're being concerned, or the writer would be concerned, that our faculties are unreliable. So it's circular reasoning.
Correct.
Reasoning either way.
It is. Yes. And the what's the I believe the Christian term for that is that all knowledge has to be given by God. I believe that's fideism. It has to be a fideist. I'm looking for the definition of that. People probably laugh at me that I look for my definitions in a book instead of just Googling
who does that, man? That's like 1,000 years ago. Who does that?
Yes, right. And I'm not even looking for it now. I'm not even looking for it in a dictionary. I'm looking for it like in this.
No, I go back to
here we go.
books all the time.
Go ahead.
Especially when I'm writing, actually. I mean, when I'm writing, especially when I'm writing stuff to do with religion, I go back to Hitchens. I go back to just excerpts from different authors. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to find the definition there that he had in this book of fideism, but I mean, more or less is that all knowledge has to come from God, right? He has a scale in here of it's actually a beautiful little scale of Christian apologetics. And you can't see it, I'm sure, but it runs from rationalism with Locke to natural theology with Aquinas and Newman, synergism with Pascal. Then he gets to, and this is from left to right, I should say. Then he gets to, on the right now, Reformed theology with Augustine, or Augustine, if you're refined and you drink Johnny Walker Black. Augustine and Calvin. And then the fideists, or fideism, Dodwell and Van Til. Van Til, who I referenced earlier, is sort of one of the fathers of presuppositionalism. That's the idea that, all knowledge has to come from God. And if you don't have that initial spark from God, then you can't really know anything. But I'm like, how do we know that God gave us, right? It just goes into the circular reasoning, just all divulges.
Okay. So I have another question to the great sacrifice, Riley, of the of the chat, the 30-minute chat.
Yes, this was for all those who are wondering. This was I was like, hop on, James. We'll do like a 30-minute Hitch salute, and then we'll get off. What are we at now? We're at an hour 43. So whenever you're ready, James, just let me know. But I continue to drink this, and it continues to go well. So
hey, look, man. I think it was Hitchens himself once again who said it almost feels like a sin to break off such conversations. So I'm
arguably my favorite quote, arguably my favorite line he ever uttered. It has been. I love that line. Yeah, it's great. Proceed.
So many to choose from.
Yeah.
Okay, so Pascal's wager. So I read Pascal, and in all fairness, I quite liked his writing. I felt that he was an interesting. His thought process was interesting. It was quite sophisticated. And he was kind of dealing more with probability, I guess.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the actual wager, I overall disagree with the claim that it's valid. To say that, probably. I mean, look, I think probability matters. I can see that all day long, but it's still fallacious to me because what about the gods that we don't know yet? What about the ones? I mean, how do we ever come to that conclusion? So, what do you think of Pascal's wager? Are you somewhat convinced? Do you think it's kind of reasonable, or?
Well, to be entirely transparent, I've not read it in his own words in the whole, and especially all the surrounding context. Um, I like to acknowledge if I haven't actually read something. I think people are always afraid to say they haven't read X if they have not, if they speak on things like this. But I've not read that particular bit of
Mhm.
Pascal, which I think I do have. Yeah, I do. I
It'd
do
be one
have
of
it
your
in
great
the
books.
Great Ones.
Yeah, yeah. They're
I do
beautiful.
have it, but I haven't read his particular. But as the basic assumption goes, what it's kind of what do you have to lose, right? It's the what do you have to lose proposition. And maybe I don't know. Maybe that is if that's not exactly what he meant, I don't know. But that's how it's always been presented to me by Christians and by non-believers. And I just tend to think that that is a direct contradiction to the idea that, as evangelicals would say, Jesus knows your heart, like, right? He knows what you're thinking. He knows your motivations for doing thing, right? It's don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing, right?
Yeah.
So to me, if I'm just believing it for the fact that it's a wager, then okay. But if I'm not looking at it as a disingenuous way, maybe I'm saying like, okay, I'm 18 years old and I'm looking at my life. I'm like, well, I could live like this and follow this path, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And then let's say I say, well, let's just go for it, and I just become a Christian, and I do end up going down that road, and I believe it, and I become a genuine Christian. Maybe the wager, the gamble was like initial, and then I actually become genuine in that sense. Um, you know, in that case, I guess it's just a matter of what are you more concerned about? Are you more concerned about the veracity of your, knowledge claims in this life, or in banking on, what's going to happen in the next? And are you sure? Are you so sure that, Pascal's claims about the nature of the significance of this decision are true? In other words, if you get it wrong, do you actually go to hell? Like, are you
Mm.
actually permanently separated from God? Like, this is assuming the traditional, you know, um, black and white hell or heaven narrative. The idea that if you get it wrong, but like I said, if it's true and you can connect to this being and live a life of faith, and it's a better life, then maybe someone should go for it. I used to really, I'd say Riley, fresh out of college, angry atheist that I was, would have said that no, like the primary importance in life is to be right, right? It's to know what the truth is. But I'll tell you what, I sure as hell would rather be friends with a evangelical Christian who is kind and friendly and that shares interests with me than I would someone who checks every box that I have in terms of philosophical knowledge claims and is an total asshat. Right? It's
Yeah.
and so then I start thinking about, as I get older, I'm like, man, I'm like, does it matter? Does it really matter that much? I just, so many of my friends to this day are believers and stuff. And I get along with many of them so well. And I mean, me and Kaylee, my significant other, we'll have a laugh about. She's always going to different coffee shops around town, and there's like all the hipster places downtown that tend to be more liberal, and there's coffee shops in this part of town, the north, this side, whatever. Um, the best coffee in town, indisputably, is at a small Christian coffee shop, and the girls who run are all like teenage to young adult girls, and they all are genuinely incredibly nice. They're not so many of these coffee shops we go into, and I'm like, I don't know why you come here because these people are so rude. These
Yeah.
gals are just like as sweet as can be, genuinely like the nicest people. And it's for sure like a religious institute, and I would rather go there than literally anywhere. So what is that? What does that tell me about Pascal's wager and where what I do and
Mm.
what I bank on these things? I mean, uh, yeah, I don't. That's kind of my 2 cents on the
Yeah,
wager, I
I think
suppose.
if I remember correctly, well, firstly, I remember that Hitchens described it as a huckster. What are you gonna lose? I remember him saying that. It's brilliant.
Yes.
Um, ju- ah, just, ah, just. brilliant, brilliant moment. But if I remember correctly, it was a while. It was probably a year ago when I read it, and I honestly I would love to reread it because I did enjoy reading it. It was really interesting. I think maybe I'm just mixing this up with Kierkegaard, but I think what Pascal was going for is at the end of the day, just make sure that you actually look into it. Make sure that you genuinely are searching for the truth. And from what I could tell, he was of the opinion that as long as you were doing your best to search for truth, that's the best you could do. Because I have heard some Christians say, and on what authority I hear you ask, well, I have heard them say that the Pascal's wager is often mischaracterized, and maybe it is. But I think I know what Pascal himself said, which was what I said, which is that as long as you're genuinely trying to seek the truth, then that's all you can possibly do. And I think I remember reading that, being like, yeah, okay, look, fair enough. And I think the theory itself obviously gets a lot of criticism, which I agree with it, basically, because it does contradict the fact that God would know your will. And clearly, not only does he know your will, but he's also in charge, theoretically speaking, of your life and what decisions you make. I don't buy the fact that we have our own free will. I mean, if we do under God, then it's under an illusion, considering the fact that we were brought into existence and predetermined by God. And then the Christian could turn around and say, well, knowledge doesn't demonstrate just because God has knowledge of what you will do doesn't say that he controls what you do, but actually he does, because God is the arbiter of everything. So that doesn't add up to me. So for that reason specifically, the Pascal's wager just doesn't add up for me.
That was exactly one of the points in college that one of my initial holes in the hull of the ship that created the sinking effect that became atheism was hell. But after that, shortly thereafter, I would have vigorous debates, the faithful Arminian I was, against a Calvinist that was at my school. And one of the fatal realizations that I came to was that there really wasn't much of a difference between my supposed free will position and their predestination position. Adding in free will, I still could not find a way to justify the wrath of God against me as a sinful creature, because the idea is that even if you have your free will, as Hitch would say, you were born sick and commanded to be well. And that has stuck with me forever, because I thought about that, and I thought about, okay, I'm not born with a 99.9% chance to sin. It is 100%. And I'm being damned on that 100%. And supposedly the refusal to accept Christ and like his forgiveness and whatnot. But even the fact that I can be condemned based on 100% my own nature, when this was the nature I was given, to me is just utterly despicable and unjust. So I applaud you for raising that point, because it just like I earlier was raising the point about, can we even trust the scripture in this point? You're looking at the presuppositions of the argument and saying, hold on, this isn't even a real distinction. There's not even a real distinction here between the two positions, and I completely agree with you on that. It's a false division.
Yeah, but I'd recommend checking out the text itself, because Pascal did feel ingenuous to me, like that he was reasoning very impressive, I will say. I think I have a short review of it on my channel.
Yeah.
I think I'll have to rewatch it, but I think I'd probably say the same as I did here, but more refreshed on the difference between my preconception of the theory versus my experience of reading it. I mean, it's one of those ones that is very catchy, but lots of holes in it.
Falls short eventually. Yeah. I have a. Oh, go ahead.
No.
Okay. I have a So today, the reason we actually started talking was because I replied to a screenshot you have, and I wanted to ask you about it. And then I wanted to maybe read the line. I'm sure everyone will love me finding a book again behind me again, but I wanted to read a line that I mentioned from Hitch. So you had a a quote from The Conquest of Happiness. Is that Conquest of Happiness? Is that Russell?
It
Or
is,
is it?
yeah,
It is Russell.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's on my list of every book that's ever been written to read. Right. That's what it feels like
Yeah, no,
at this
on my
point.
Goodreads list, I've got literally about 800 books. Literally,
It's insanity.
yeah,
I have a on cue stack right here that you can't see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
yeah.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I like 15 books on it. I'm not even, hopefully I'll read them all this year, but
Those
I'll
ones
probably
are
end up buying
my
one or.
those ones are my to read that
Oh,
stack.
okay.
So yeah, my
Okay.
physical copy, but yeah, the physical ones
Okay.
that
So
I
you're
have.
reading Russell's The Conquest of Happiness, and you
Yeah,
highlighted and underlined um, the more things a man is interested in, the more opportunities of happiness he has, and the less he is at the mercy of fate, since if he loses one thing, he can fall back upon another. Life is too short to be interested in everything, but it is good to be interested in as many things as are necessary to fill our days. I love that. I have to read this book now. It's gonna skip the queue probably. So tell me why you underlined that, and then I want to read a horrible, heartbreaking piece from Martin Amos's autofiction about Hitch and being interested in everything in order to fully crush
yeah.
our listeners before we close the podcast. To make I want to end this, of course, on the saddest
Before
note
I
possible.
shut down of tiredness or whatever.
Yes, yes, and before James
Yeah,
collapses.
yeah,
So
yeah.
tell me why you underlined that.
I underlined it because when I underline things in books, it's not always because I think it's original, because most of the time it isn't. It's more the way that it's said and how it connects to me at the time that I read it. And I feel like it's relatable because if we orient ourselves on one axiom, in life our axioms fail us a lot of the time. Like, for example,
Yeah.
maybe in your case, I don't know, because I know that you have many different interests, so maybe it isn't valid. But like when somebody is devoutly religious and that is their axiom, like yeah, sure, they might like music, but they're not really like that into it. Or maybe they're like photography, but they're not like that into it. But the singular axiom is their faith in God or in their religion. And when that crumbles, everything crumbles, like literally everything, because that constitutes their entire worldview. That constitutes their joys, their sadness, their entire viewpoint, their entire perspective depends on that being true, right? And so when that
Yeah.
happens, that's devastating. That is devastating. And so what Russell is trying to say, I think, is it's important to have. I mean, it's very important to have different interests for many different reasons. But I think one of them, on a personal level, from my interpretation, is that when life crushes you and when it falls down, it's really good to have auxiliary things around you that haven't fallen down. Like, for example, music.
Yeah.
Like, like I really enjoy music, and it's something that doesn't fail you. And it's a good example because I think everybody can relate to it in some regard. Like, you can fail a test, let's say, and you've studied for this for 6 months. Okay, you failed it. You get home, and you know that playing this music, you just press a button, and it comes on, and it plays, and it only stops when you stop it. You know, like
Yeah.
it doesn't fail
It's
you.
wonderful.
It doesn't fail you.
No.
Um, and I think that's really important because we need things in our life that don't fail us. And on a psychological level, that's why families are so important, because they're supposed to be the foundation of our being, of our emotional and relationships. They're supposed to be the pillars of that. I mean, for example, that's why. I mean, look, to illustrate this, it's so important that when people don't have a good father figure, they make one. This explains why people idolized Hitler and Manson, or why, for example, young women might want to be with older men if their parental figure is insufficient. Um,
Sure.
it all adds up, basically. It all comes down to the fact that what we lack, we make up for, and if we make up for it superficially, then we pay for it. We really do. Like, seriously, we do. Um, and this just all encapsulates the idea that we need different pillars in our lives to hold us up. Because if there's only one pillar, we're going to fall and we're going to crush under it. So, and I just think it's such a deep quote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's important to stretch one's own personhood enough to become interested in multiple things. I think it's also a sign, not always. Some people get obsessed with one thing and they have a depth about it that is
Sure.
just requires that obsession.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people just do one thing and it's just intellectual laziness and cowardice in the part of their ability to try new things. And they don't develop their personality and they don't try different things because, oh my God, so many things in life are interesting. I actually tend to lean towards the part where you can't be interested in everything. I've had to beat that into my head over the past 5 years where you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I'd say yes. Like that is how I am. Like I just want to know it all and do it all and be 1,000 different things. And I struggle with that. And as I've gone through my 20s, I've started to really just try to hone in on the things that mean the most to me and that I've repeatedly found over my life have brought value to me. And then I've tried to just focus on those things or find things that allow me to explore other venues, like starting this podcast and writing, which I have been slacking on, of course, but, is part of the idea behind that was because I could master a medium, or at least try to master a medium, and have lots of topics of discussion within that, which would kind of scratch my itch for, all sorts of different things while still pursuing one way. So I think it's incredibly true, though. If you are interested in lots of things, when one thing goes awry, it's just so nice to be able to just sit back and, do something different. Like you said, if James, God forbid, goes deaf tomorrow, he can still read, like, right? You could still carry on, you wouldn't be utterly crushed because it's not just music that's so fulfilling. So I do want to read this line. And of course, the book is not where I thought it was, so I will once again attempt to move and acquire it. Let's just see if I can find it here. Let me move this out of the way. Okay, I've spotted it. Let me grab it. Okay, so a little background knowledge. Martin Amis, Christopher Hitchens' lifelong best friend, wrote this book, Inside Story. It came out earlier this year, or was it last year? Last year it came out, early last year or the year before. And it's a wonderful piece of autofiction, as he calls it, where it's somewhat true stories, but there's some, he tells it like, he goes into whole parts of his life and he goes dialogue word for word. So obviously it has to be fictionalized to a degree, because even tomorrow, James, if I wanted to go write down exactly what you and I said back and forth, I would get like maybe one line right. That's it. So of course it has to be fictionalized to a degree. But in this, I'm going to have to find the section here, so I'll try to monologue while I do. But in this, Martin goes and meets with one of his ex-girlfriend, Phoebe. And she's dying. And Hitch has already died. I found it. Here we go. And so Hitchens has already died, and Phoebe is dying, and Martin Amis visits her. And they're discussing death and the fact that they're both getting older. And Phoebe says this to Martin. "Notice all the books, Mart? I used to spend the whole time reading. Then I stopped. I didn't want to be interested in anything. That's what I thought when I saw Christopher died. I thought, oh, he was interested in so many things. Me, I could go at any time. I've got a suicide pack's worth of pills stored away anytime at all. And man, that just about tore my heart out when I first read it. Which was, I think one of the difficult things about death is when death is untimely. And granted, Hitch was, in his 60s, even if it was his early 60s, and he lived a life, full of experience, more so than many of us will will even hope to live. But he was still like, there was still, all of us could see it, the vibrancy that he still had. And we all look around at the things happening now, and he'd only be 73 this year, right? He could have, the man could have had 2 decades left in him, even this year. And then you read that and you just think he was interested in everything. Man, it just makes me want to cry. And it makes me think about my own mortality and about being interested in things. And I always think about that Hitch line where he says, people say when you die, it's the end of the party. And he said, no, it's not the end of the party. You're just being tapped on the shoulder and asked to leave. And man, I'm not gonna cry here. 2 Johnny Walker Deeps on a Wednesday. I'm not gonna cry, but man, that kills me. It really does. It really does. And hearing her say that, and I have a hard time thinking that part is fiction. I more or less would be surprised if she actually didn't say something along those lines to Martin. He was interested in everything, and all of a sudden, man, you don't get to be interested anymore. You gotta, it's just doctors and needles, and then that's it.
But the last section of mortality is difficult to read every single time. Just when you're triumphantly reading through it, right? You're triumphantly reading through it, like, yeah, Hitch is doing good. Hitch is Hitch. Hitch is being the Hitch that we know, and then you get to the part where he's no longer writing it, and he didn't even realize he wasn't going to write it anymore. It just happens. And his wife just talks about the towers of books and the notes inside of his books that she still probably hasn't even found all of them yet. I mean, I feel like the reader, it happens so suddenly for the reader that you could almost be in the room with him as it happened himself. Like that's, and you also see his jottings. It's almost like you see his consciousness sparking out. In some regard. It's just,
it's
difficult.
It's like when his friends came at the end, and they talked about how he would have no goodbyes and no talk of the doctors or what was going on there. It was only G.K. Chesterton and some sort of political this or that, or something about current events. It was just the man to the end was interested in everything, and then it's just lights out. I don't know. It's moments like that where I'm like, oh man, I wish there was a heaven. Just revoke all my principles and wish it was different. But he was, in his own treatment of his own mortality, he was immensely courageous and admirable. And would always say, can you imagine a world in which your dad never died and you never could, get out in your world and you become the father at that point. He said, what world would that be? He talked a lot about that. So. But it's hard, man, and that line's gonna stick with me forever. Forever. There's a few books that you read stuff, and I was kind of one of those people for a long time where people like say they read things that changed their life, and I won't say that I read that and it changed my life, but it's one of those things I read, and it's just stuck. It's just I'm gonna think about that to the day I die.
Yeah,
and
I think I'd like to think that on the final days, if I'm aware of the final days. Because I don't know if we want to get into mortality. I mean, I'm happy to, but Hitchens was one of the foundations for me realizing. I mean, a lot of things realize mortality for me, but Hitchens definitely did. His book, The Last Interviews, his comments on mortality, and he's just one of the things, I guess, that alarmed me of it. And I think, yeah, if I would read Mortality, and I'd probably find consolation in it, knowing that I
Yeah.
have the handbook of a man that I only aspire to handle such a situation as well as he did. Um, Mortality's I don't know, man. I think about it a lot,
Yeah.
especially on a psychological level, which, I think something has to be said, and I'm aware of this myself. But there comes a point when you study mortality that you try and intellectualize it to hide the fact that it's there and that it's true. Like terror management theory. That's a really, really interesting. I don't know how familiar you are with the literature. Um,
Not much.
so terror management theory is so shorthand for TMT. So it's it basically is everything that we do is in a defense mechanism against mortality, against death. I'm interviewing Sheldon Solomon um, in a month, and he's one of the authors of the Worm at the Core, which is a book basically well, I mean, Ernest Becker was original with this, but they present it in the modern sense. There's a few authors, but Solomon is one of them. And it's, yeah, like I said, the theory that death is at the well, like the title suggests, the worm at the core, death is at the core of everything that we do. And I genuinely believe that. Um, and it, mortality never really escapes me. I mean,
No.
even in the middle of the night, I just get like these weird visions. I don't know, the last 2 seconds, and it's kind of this panic that this thing that can't be intellectualized, this thing that can't be philosophized, this thing that can't be analyzed or understood is going to happen regardless of what we do. Um, it's inescapable, and I think you probably agree with me in this regard. That is, both of us are interested in understanding things, I guess, and trying to see how they work, and trying to also have consolation in understanding them in some regard. And what I think the interesting thing about death and mortality is that it's a dead end, quite literally. Like, you can read about it, you can intellectualize it, you can say, you can look at theories, you can read books about it, but at the end of the day, it just is. And I think that's the thing that is most terrifying about it, because it doesn't matter how much you intellectualize it, it doesn't matter how much you read, it's still there. It's the worm at the core. I
Yeah.
don't know what you think about this, but it's, for me at least, it's a major thing.
Yeah. I think the things that are most potent about death is not the like the trying to philosophize about it, or it's things that are like reading that, or poetry. And because I'm such a fan of Hitch, of course I ran into Philip Larkin,
Mm-hmm.
who's up here, and he has one of his poems is specifically about death. And
I think I might know the one you mean. I think I read Larkin. Yeah, not too long ago actually. There was
yeah,
one in particular though.
it's called Abad or Abaid. I actually not 100% sure. I think it's Abad,
Mm-hmm.
even though the E's on the end of it and it should be a long A. But yeah, it's specifically about death. And he writes, it's let's see, one, two, three, four, like 6 stanzas um, about death, and it's it is I think it better encapsulates it than anything. Like one of the lines here is or just one of the stanzas. This is probably my favorite one, but it's this is a special way of being afraid. No trick dispels religion used to try. The vast moth-eaten musical brocade, created to pretend we never die, and specious stuff or speckish stuff that says no rational being can fear a thing it will not feel, not seeing, That is what we fear. No sight, no sound, no touch or taste or smell, nothing to think with, nothing to love or link with. The anesthetic from which none come round. It's
I haven't heard of that one actually. Wow.
and that's one stanza from that, and the entirety of it is horrifying. um,
Jesus.
yes,
I'll have to check it out when I'm on another day.
yeah, yeah,
So to close off,
yes.
I want to ask you, what are the things that you appreciate most about life in general? Like, what are the things that you cherish the most? Maybe that have surprised you, maybe that don't surprise you. I don't know. Like, what are the main things that you get up for in the morning, basically?
I mean, I don't know if I've ever been asked that in that exact phrasing. James is a couple Johnny Walker Blacks deep, and he's, what do I most appreciate
Mm,
about life? That's an interesting phrasing about life. I mean, I think that's a lot of the reason that I like Hitch is not just because of his wit or this or that, but because I admire and I prioritize a lot of the things that he did, and that's why I like him so much. I'm not saying we're the same person, but if you're talking about what I appreciate in life most, man, friendship is so high on that list. It's so high on that list, and that was such something that was so dear to Hitch, and that's another one of the many reasons I admire him so much. Um, so friendship is a huge one. Just the ability to talk to people and have conversations like this, with you, James, and with others. That's a huge motivation for me. Is doing that sort of thing. So just relationships in general. Um, relationship with my girlfriend, my partner. We've been together now for 7.5 years or something, and those are the things that kind of get me up. That and the, just trying to do things well, get better at things. I appreciate that life gives me something that isn't easy, but allows me to get better at it. I love progression. I love starting something and trying to get better at it. It's very fulfilling to me. Um, yeah, I don't know, man, but friendship's a big one. Just I guess how the never-ending interest that is in all things. Like I said before, like I could just spend,
mm.
man, I could spend a lifetime after a lifetime doing different things, and different career paths or this or that. I don't know, friendships and relationships, and isn't that? I mean, that's a big one for everybody. But I think at the end of the day, like I said earlier, when it comes to like who I'd rather spend time with, I'd rather spend time with a Christian that I'm friends with than
Yeah.
someone who agrees with me and everything. Like that's humanness. That's like being a human being. Um, all right, James, your turn. You answer now, and then I'll let you go to bed. What does
Well,
James appreciate most about life?
excuse me if I plagiarize, but
It's okay.
yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, my favorite part about YouTube and what I've been doing in the past, like quite literally, my favorite thing about the past 3 years, 4 years, whatever, I think 3 years of doing YouTube, and because that's what really opened everything up. And my favorite part has just been meeting different people. Um, and I might have disagreed with them. I might have agreed with them. We may be discussing Hitch, but the correlation would be is that there are people who are ready to have conversations that I actually about subjects that I actually care about.
Yeah.
Because I think you'd agree, growing up as a stereotypical teenager, it's very easy to think that nobody else, uh, is considering these questions, existential
Yeah.
questions, or insecurities, I guess. Um, and then the consolation is found when you grow up and realize that actually people are, they just, like you, believe that no one else was as well. Um, and so I think my favorite thing is definitely the ability to have such deep connections. And I mean, I think the internet, for what people blame it for, I agree. But I think we overlook the fact that I mean, I speak for myself, but people like me who are hermits, who only go outside maybe for a leisurely walk at times, or maybe a book hunt. For people such as me, hermits who don't go out too often, the internet is a gift that can never be. Uh, there's no other value over that, because it's opened the door for such opportunities such as this one. And without it, I'd be at a loss. Um, so I would agree with you. I'd plagiarize you and say, look, yeah, it's definitely the opportunity to have sort of deep connections, um, to have conversations, um, that are open and that are honest, and that aren't restricted to them being in person. Because I mean, we would never have met. We
No.
would never have met if it wasn't for the internet. And I can't imagine, you know, how that would be without, talking about the Hitch, recounting his finest moments, with somebody well, with nobody really. I mean, it's unparalleled, obviously, to not have that ability at all. So yeah, I would agree with you. I'd say just relationships, um, the meaning that other people give us in a meaningless or seemingly meaningless world. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. It's I think what you said, finding someone who is like you, and when someone does that, you get solidarity and you get this feeling that, man, maybe I am not, like you said, the angsty teenager, like maybe I am not alone. And I
mm,
think that in its own way is an antidote to the problem we just talked about, which is death, because
mm,
death ultimately has to be experienced alone. It's
mm,
just you. You have to experience death by yourself. And that's what I think, that's part of what we all feel, like this sense of like our own just aloneness. And when you find someone who is interested in what you're interested in, you get that sort of solidarity that I think just extends you away from that black curtain of just death and just being alone. And I think you're right. It's just incredibly meaningful, very fulfilling.
yeah. No, no, totally. It counts for something, to say
It
the very
does.
least. It counts for something. It doesn't fix the issue, doesn't solve anything, I guess, at the end of the day anyway. But for what it's worth, it does what it can, and that's enough, because it
It's
has to
enough for
be.
me.
It
It's
has to
enough.
be enough, because that is enough.
Yeah.
Um, well, Riley, as much as I said, it's a sin to break off good conversation. An end has to come somewhere.
It has to come. Has to
Yeah,
come, James. And it is rolling up on, let's see if I can do the math this time, 9, 10, 11, 12, 19 now. Your time, is that right?
1
One
a.m.
night. It's 5. It's 5 hours. I'm always thinking the pond is 4, from East Coast to that. It's not. It's 5. I'm losing it. All right. Well, 1
Practice
a.m. That's
comes
even.
perfect, man.
Yes, that's even worse than I previously suspected. So, all right. Hey, well, thanks for, again. Always so thankful for you taking time to pop on here and chat, and especially last minute. I had no intentions of waking up today, knowing I was going to be back in the
Yeah,
podcast game after a couple months out, but
yeah. I
happy
had
to
no
do this.
intentions of getting out of bed and getting dressed again. Yeah,
Yes, James had to take off the snuggie, right? The Hitch
yeah.
snuggie
The
that we
hitch,
all have.
the hitch onesie or something like that. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. With like Johnny Walker, sort of a bear outfit or something, with him like hugging a Johnny Walker or something like that. Yeah,
Yes. Brilliant. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, James, and much appreciated, and extremely grateful for you and your friendship over the last few months. So thanks so much.